Hi, this is Linda from Let's Talk Prepping, and I thought we should look at Venezuela and see what they are doing to live. How are they surviving? Because the same thing is coming our way, and it can be a roadmap to us surviving this catastrophe. There's not much we can do about what is happening in the world, but we can prepare. We have a real-life example of what can happen to us, and it might help us as preppers to prepare for what is coming our way. So let's go look at Venezuela now. I'm over here at the American Institute of Economic Research, and it says Venezuelans revert to pre-money era with barter. It says they're not only struggling with scarcity and repression, but inflation could surpass 2,000% next year. Now, granted, this was written in 2017. This has led locals to adopt the old custom of barter for goods and services to recover purchasing power. Venezuela was the most prosperous Latin American country in the mid-20th century. The problems grew when Hugo Chavez introduced an expansive and unsustainable welfare system. Can't you see how that's been happening here? Our welfare system is growing out of control here. Prior administrations were able to maintain Venezuela's position as an economic leader in the region due to her abundant oil production. And then Chavez began to stumble in 2008, and Chavez issued more of the local bolivar currency and took on foreign debt, and we're just issuing more and more of our currency too, until it reached 71% of the GDP. I guess I'll have to go and look and see what our percentage is. Venezuelans distrust their currency and government more each day, but they are taking whatever actions they can and creating networks to protect themselves. One such mechanism to tackle scarcity and rapidly inflating prices is barter. They have created private groups on Facebook, although now Facebook will probably ban them, but it would certainly ban us from doing that. They're using the hashtag TrueQ, which means barter exchange, in tweets and on Facebook to obtain goods and services they need. They prefer to rely on each other via social networks rather than on formal or approved economy. Resilience propels people to look for alternative ways to satisfy their needs, often outside the law. When the governing system represents a threat to their well-being and jeopardizes their freedom. So this is from the American Institute of Economic Research. Now we go over to off-the-grid news here. Grid failure and hyperinflation lead to bartering in Venezuela. I believe this is coming to us soon. Grid failure and hyperinflation are creating a barter economy in Venezuela. To elaborate, Venezuelans with no cash and electricity must barter to survive, so you should start prepping your barter items. And if you don't have money for barter items, at least get as many food preps as you can. This sign means barter, he says. The barter sign means that people can still trade items for food and other essentials instead of paying cash. They're bartering because cash is unavailable or worthless, and you can bet our dollar's going to be worthless. A kilo, 2.2 pounds of meat costs 15,000 bolivars at a butcher shop. The bolivar is Venezuela's worthless currency. However, many Venezuelans have not seen one in months because the banking system is collapsing. So families cannot buy food because of grid failure and hyperinflation. For this reason, many Venezuelans use cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin or US dollars to pay for food. However, you can only access digital cryptocurrencies through the internet, so they're not available if there's no electricity. This means that many Venezuelans could not buy food during the massive blackout last month. Electricity was off in 18 of Venezuela's 23 provinces. Barter and foreign currencies like the US dollar and euro were the only ways Venezuelans could buy food. And many of the merchants refused to take their own currency. A butcher admits that over 10% of his business is in dollars. So families turn to the black market to survive because of hyperinflation. Talks about these two people using dollars to buy vegetables, and they're technically criminals because it's illegal for them to possess a foreign currency. However, hungry Venezuelans will widely ignore the law and a ban on cryptocurrency. I keep all my money in Bitcoins, one person said. However, they can't access Bitcoins during blackouts. He said he could use a solar electric system to power a satellite phone to access his Bitcoins in an emergency. So grid failure and hyperinflation turn Venezuelans into criminals. Hyperinflation is turning many Venezuelans into criminals because they want to feed their families. And the prices will rise by over 50% a month. That's outrageous. Is it coming here? I hope not, but I think I've been seeing signs of it all over the place. It says there he's bankrupting ordinary Venezuelans by destroying the value of their money. And here they say Democrats want grid failure and hyperinflation in America. Americans must prepare for grid failure and hyperinflation as well, since many Democrats plan socialist policies similar to Maduro's. For example, Democratic leaders like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are embracing the modern monetary theory believes the government can pay for gigantic social programs by printing unlimited amounts of money, and we're certainly doing that now. The critics call it the magic money tree, and it's a recipe for hyperinflation. In short, and I'm going to read this right here, in short, Americans could face hyperinflation and grid failure soon. I believe that. In short, Americans could face hyperinflation and grid failure soon. And all of you preppers out there, I'm sure you believe it too. Here it says, smart Americans will prepare immediately for grid failure and hyperinflation with stockpiles of essentials, new technology, gardens, and backup power system. Such preparations today could help your family eat in a few years. So that's about Venezuela and what's happening now there, and it's very scary because it's coming here. And again, off the grid news, grid failure devastates city in collapsing Venezuela. Life without the grid is no picnic in collapsing Venezuela. Notably, a blackout is taking the country's second largest city back to the dark ages. Now, here's what we have to worry about: looting. They've been looting before we had blackouts. Think of Seattle and Portland and New York City. And you know they're going to be looting once we get blackouts and hyperinflation. Lack of health care. Battles between business owners and looters. Food shortages. Empty store shelves. All of us are seeing these empty store shelves now, are among the blackout effects. Moreover, water lines, the internet, wireless service, and telephone service no longer work in the city. The grid is collapsing because of a political crisis and the country's failed socialist economic policies. Looting and violence are among the effects of the grid collapse. Grid failure leads to total madness in collapsing Venezuela. In fact, business owners and security guards are fighting gang members and looters in the cities. Hospitals lack medical supplies to treat people. So what you might want to do is stock up on your medical supplies. It was total madness. Ricardo Acosta said of the situation. For example, Uridenta describes an emergency room as something like from a war film. Dozens of patients and their families were crowded into the sweltering ward, a few lying on beds, others slumped on the blood-stained floor. If you think it can't happen here, you're deceiving yourself. They had a backup generator. Plus, they saw doctors tell a heart attack victim he will have to provide his own medicine in the emergency room since there's a shortage of medicine because the country's economy is collapsing. Grid collapse throws country into chaos. The nightmare began when the electricity went off. Chaos erupted because the blackout lasted for several days. Suppose it lasted for months. What's going to happen? Nobody knows the cause of the blackout. Socialism destroys grid in collapsing Venezuela. Venezuela's grid collapse demonstrates the need to prep. Plus, Venezuela has very little backup power generation. Hence, if the grid goes down, the lights go out, throwing the country into chaos. The catastrophe in collapsing Venezuela shows why everyone must prepare for a grid collapse. Only those prepared with backup power, weapons, very important weapons, and stockpiles of food and other supplies can comfortably survive grid collapse. Thus, Venezuela's collapse should teach Americans to stop laughing at preppers. I'm sorry for the doom and gloom, but I think some people need to see this. And here's Ask a Prepper. After about 50 years ago, Venezuela was one of the most stable countries in the world. Large oil reserves, and then 30 years of misguided economic policies, sort of like the ones we have now, has unleashed what is now a country full of misery, long lines to buy food. I'm not even sure the government's going to have food. I've read where there might be food in the supermarkets in Venezuela, but it's so expensive people can't even afford to buy it. Hospitals and health centers in poor condition. The largest exodus of professionals in the history of the country. Inflation at more than 40% a month. At the end of the last century, inflation led countries like Argentina, Brazil, and Zimbabwe to devalue their currency, causing an economic disaster that ended up affecting the most vulnerable citizens, those who lived on fixed monthly incomes. So a surgeon at one of the most important hospitals has a monthly salary of barely $10. That's a monthly salary, and is one of the highest for a public administration worker. The minimum monthly wage is less than $4. So this has led people to trade or barter or to ask for goods instead of money. So those are some of the problems facing Venezuela, and I'm sure it's coming here. So I want you to get prepared. The next video is going to be on bartering. We're going to see what Venezuela is bartering and what maybe we should stock up on based on what they're doing. And I hope that you will like the video. Please comment on anything about the video that you might have, anything that will help us, and please subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.